Hey you guys, welcome to Localite, and today we are discussing something that is totally out of my area of knowledge. So I am learning just the same as you are. We are discussing the history of Lewis and Clark and the proof of their existence here in the Columbia Gorge, or their coming through the Columbia Gorge. And with me is Ken, and I'm gonna probably murder his last name, Karsmizki, and he's in studio with me today to talk about just that thing. So Ken, did I get the name right?
Karsmizki.
Karsmizki.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
I've been trying to practice it, but you know, I'm still going to stumble.
It's a hard one. It's a tongue twister.
It is a tongue twister.
Yeah.
So tell me about what it is that you do.
Well, this is essentially a quest that I started in 1987 when someone said, you know, why don't you just go out and find a Lewis and Clark campsite? You're trained as a historian. You're trained as an archaeologist. You know, just go out and do it. And I thought, well, you know, that ought to be easy. They wrote journals, over 1 million words. They drew maps. They took latitudes. They did all of this. And a lot of people have written about them. But the first thing I found out was that no one had ever found any physical evidence of a campsite anywhere.
Really?
8,000 miles, 863 days. They were out 600 campsites, and no one had ever found any. And I thought, why?
But we've all heard about Lewis and Clark, and we're all so familiar with Lewis and Clark, and it's almost like it's irrefutable. They were here.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the, I think that's one of the hurdles we have to get over. For instance, you can go within, I would say, a quarter mile of here, and what you'll see is a brown and white sign that we've all seen. It has Lewis and Clark, and they're pointing.
Yeah.
And it says Lewis and Clark campsite. And okay, I believe that.
Sure.
But who says? You know, basically the way I look at it as a historian or an archaeologist, show me the evidence. Show me some physical evidence. And I thought, well, that's what I've been trained to do, so let's go do it. And the first thing that people say is, well, why don't you just take a look at their latitude, for instance? They calculated, they were shooting the stars, they were shooting the sun, they were calculating latitude. They actually weren't calculating longitude. But for instance, they calculated a latitude for what they called Rock Fort, which is right here in the Dalles, and that latitude is not of the Dalles. It actually is Maupin.
Really?
That's 45 miles away. 45 miles, in fact, 45 miles away from the river, up in the dry land.
Yeah.
And so how could they do that? Well, when you think of them holding a handheld compass or holding a sextant or an octant, all you have to do is make a mistake of 1 degree, and at this latitude, that's 45 miles in terms of mistake.
Oh my
and
goodness.
if I look at 45 north latitude, I'm going to be 45 miles away from anything that they could have left. So I'll never find it.
Right.
Yeah. So basically you have to throw out that piece of evidence. The other thing that people would always say to me is, well, didn't they draw maps? And in fact, they did. They drew hundreds of maps. Only one map maker, which is another nice thing about it, was William Clark. He was the only one who drew maps. And he drew 4 different maps of this area. And if you superimposed one on top of the other, you wouldn't know you were in the same place.
Really?
All 4
Are
look
that
different. Yeah. So the question is, which might be the best? And that was one of the things that we were interested in, is which map could be the most representative of the maps. But then people would at that point say, well, didn't they write journals? Yeah, about 1 million words. But the problem is that each one would see it a little bit differently. There were 9 journalists out of 33 guys in the expedition.
Okay.
And each journalist was a little bit different. For instance, if you were the captain and you didn't have to haul anything, from point A to point B might seem like 10 miles. If you were the private and you had to carry a load, point A to point B might seem like 50 miles.
Yeah.
And that may be what you put in your journal, 50 miles. And then you look at somebody else and it said 10 miles.
It was all relative to
so
what
it was
they
all
were dealing
relative
with. Yeah.
to, it could be the flow of the current, If it was really flowing one day, they'd be clipping along and they may not be able to accurately gauge it. Along here, they hit so many rapids that it was hard to gauge it because they were stopping and starting, trying to get through those rapids. So their distances in the journals are a problem as well. And one of the other things that you have are people that can even sort of change their mind midstream. For instance, William Clark says that we camped on top of a rock outcrop. And John Ordway, one of the sergeants, also said that we camped on top of a rock outcrop. John Whitehouse, who was a private, said we camped near a rock outcrop. Later that same day, he said we camped on a rock outcrop. So he changed it from near it to on it. And you'll end up seeing those kinds of things happening all the time. The same thing, it's not unique to this place. It's essentially the same thing every place that you go. If you're out at Fort Clatsop, for instance, out on the Pacific Ocean, and you look at the journals, one person said that up the Natul River, they went 1.5 miles, and that's where they built the fort. Somebody else says, no, it was 2 miles. Somebody else says, no, it was 3 miles. Clark says it was 4 miles. And then at another time, Clark says it was 8 miles. You know, it can't be 8, 4, 3, 2, and
right.
1.5 miles.
It's got to be somewhere in there.
It's got to be somewhere.
Yeah.
But you really, so basically, the idea is that, one, you have to read everything that you can that they wrote, and then you have to be critical of that and say, well, if there are 4 maps, which is the best map? And you can really begin to see what the progression of their map making is. And you'll see that this is the first one. These next two are almost copies of each other, and then there's another one, and that was probably the most precise map. The other thing that you have to do is you have to take a look at the map. For instance, they did in 2 map sections, they did the whole Columbia River Gorge. They did roughly 50 miles, 60 miles. And if you look at a small piece of that, you may be able to find that was pretty accurate. But if you try to superimpose the whole 50 or 60 miles, it's going to start wobbling on you.
Okay.
And so those kinds of things, you basically have to throw out almost everything that they're saying, almost everything that they measure, all of their latitudes, even their maps are going to conceivably lead you wrong.
Yeah. So I mean, you're essentially starting almost at zero, and I want to talk more about that. We got to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're gonna carry on the conversation. And Ken, what do you refer to yourself as?
I'm a historical archaeologist.
Historical archaeologist.
Yeah, it's basically combining the documentary with the archaeological.
All right. So Ken Karsmizki, a historical archaeologist, right here on Localite. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.